Hi, everybody. Thanks for being with us today. We appreciate it. Thanks for sitting down to watch this podcast. It's going to be very interesting, very informative. And one of the reasons it is because we're with Shawn Telford, the senior appraiser at CoreLogic. Shawn, welcome. It's good to see you again.
Thank you, sir. Glad to be here.
Now, I assume that you work for CoreLogic, either that or you bought one of their shirts. So I'm assuming it's the first one. So before we get into this, and you and I have covered a little bit of what we're going to talk about, but before we get into this, take a couple of minutes and tell us about yourself and your family, and why you're not, or why you're in the real estate appraisal business, and why you don't have an air conditioning supply company or something like that. What got you into this incredibly fun, exciting business?
Yeah, sure. No, again, happy to be here, Tim. Appreciate the opportunity. So, yeah, I have been in this business since about 1993. I was in college and going to school, and my father, who was an appraiser, kind of on the side, got real busy and said, "Hey, come help me. I need help." And I wasn't that interested because I just wasn't. And then I got tired of working at the department store, let's put it that way, for minimum wage. And next thing you know, I was working with Dad, and I thought, wow, I could do this. This is interesting. One thing led to another, and I got I guess at the time it was what we call today a trainee license, and worked with my father and became an appraiser, and that's how I got on this path. I've had the opportunity to work for banks as a staff appraiser. I've had the opportunity to work at an AMC. I've had the opportunity to work at a technology company, and now I'm obviously with CoreLogic, and they have a lot of really cool things going on in the valuation space. And so happy to be in that role as their chief appraiser. And we're based in Mississippi here. CoreLogic has offices all over the place, but I've made my way from Salt Lake City around the U.S. back to current home of Oxford, Mississippi.
Well, Todd, thank you. Try again. Shawn, thank you very much. I appreciate that little bit of history to bring us up to date on what it is you do and why it is you do it. Now, again, you and I have spoken a little bit before we started, and we talked a little bit about the concept of bias. And that's obviously been in the news. That's going to be a lot more important in the future. But rather than talk about racial bias, which other people have done ad nauseum, let's you and I talk about some different kind of biases. One of the things we mentioned too specifically, we mentioned selection bias and confirmation bias. Now, given your background in business, you're familiar with both of those. And selection bias is basically limiting your sources of data to one or two. In other words, it's picking the low-hanging fruit, as it were. So, okay, you're the chief appraiser. You're the guy who sits and looks at appraisal reports all day long, and you're the guy who reports to the folks upstairs about what it is you're finding as you read those reports. So, relative to the concept of selection bias, what is it you're finding, and how is it that the appraiser of 6 months from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now is going to overcome the issue of selection bias?
Yeah, it's an interesting and timely question for sure, Tim. And just to reiterate, and I can't remember if we mentioned it, but the views I'm going to share are my own, not necessarily those of my employer, CoreLogic. So happy to do so, though. But the bias is something I think we talk about in appraising, and we know that it's part of USPAP. But I don't know how often we think about that in terms of our daily operations as an appraiser. So I think there's a lot of things when we study it, or when you read USPAP closely and you look for what bias is and how we are expected to think and operate as appraisers, there's a whole lot of information about what we're expected to do. I looked up in preparation for this. There's, I think 4 specific advisory opinions that provide a whole lot of direction. There's 8 FAQs that provide a lot of direction on that, and then of course there's the definitions and so forth in USPAP itself that help us understand what bias is. And so, as an appraiser, we are expected to be non-biased, and that's defined as not having an inclination that precludes an appraiser's impartiality, independence, or objectivity in an assignment. I found an interesting definition about of objectivity. It says the definition of objectivity: the fact of being based on facts and not influenced by personal beliefs or feelings. So I think, sometimes in appraising, we of course are giving our opinions, but we're also supposed to have that opinion be based on an objective analysis of the data and facts that are before us. So we have to do that analysis in an objective manner so that we can form an opinion that ends up being trusted in the marketplace. If we don't have the trust, then we're in trouble. And I think, to the specific question you asked about selection bias, that can be that's an interesting thing, I think, because we all have our human tendencies to do things repetitively in the same way. But do we really take a step back, take a moment and ask ourselves, am I being objective? Do I have any biases that are part of my thinking process or my selection process for information or data, and things of that nature? So I'm rambling on, Tim. I don't want to go forever, but I could. But it's an important topic that I think is worthy of thinking and study for appraisers.
Okay, you talk about rambling on, and so you're channeling Robert Plant, right? We'll not take that joke anywhere.
Okay.
Okay, let's talk about the low-hanging fruit concept. Part of selection bias is, say, for example, limiting yourself to the MLS. And of course, appraisers are going to say, "Oh, wait a minute, I got 2 days to get this thing done, and I'm getting paid whatever it is I'm getting paid. I don't have a time to search 47 different sources of data." So other than MLS, with which CoreLogic is involved, what other sources of data are there for appraisers to search in order to be independent, impartial, and objective?
Sure. In my experience, there's a lot of sources out there. And of course, it's going to vary on your geography and where you do your work in your business and the type of appraising that you do. But there are many sources that are both public and private when it comes to data. Over the course of my career, I've been involved with several data sharing cooperatives, so to speak, where there's data from local sources that are made available. That's an important source in some cases. There are also companies like CoreLogic, for example, that aggregate data from many different sources, both public and private, and have methods and processes to ensure that data is reliable. And then that data becomes available to appraisers and others in the industry as far as doing analysis. There's companies like Alamode have products and services that help appraisers to find the best data, and in many cases be able to share with their peers, as appropriate, of course, under privacy and USPAP. But there are lots of different ways that appraisers can get that data out there. And it's not just the MLS. Even if you're just in a non-disclosure state, there are many different sources out there that today are reliable. 10, 15, 20 years ago, maybe they weren't as reliable, but today data has become ubiquitous. And some of the sources are, we know they might be suspect for our purposes, But for I think it's important for appraisers to investigate these alternative sources, um, to make sure that they're not leaving information on the table. There's another source I just thought of is there's a source that we have access to that we provide that helps appraisers understand what's going on in the for sale by owner marketplace, which can be a very important data in some neighborhoods and analysis you might come against.
Because the for sale by owner market is obviously part of all of the data that appraisers are supposed to analyze as part of forming a credible value conclusion. Speaking of forming value conclusions, that's what we do. That's why clients hire us. But yet, every appraiser out there lives with that little tingle of fear back in their lizard brain about ending up before the state appraisal board. Now, again, you're the guy who goes over the reports. You're the guy who takes the phone calls from the appraiser with the questions. What, in your opinion, and again, this is your opinion, not CoreLogic's, what, in your opinion, are the 2 or 3 most common appraisal and reporting mistakes that you find in the reports that you handle?
We have a lot of people that look at appraisals in our organization, Tim, and I looked at some of the information that we've gathered over a little bit of time, and surprisingly, it's things that we would probably not be surprised are on there. I mean, so many of the challenges we see are what I just call sloppy errors, things that with a good proofread or thinking would be caught. Sometimes they're created because appraisers like to clone when working in the forms world and things of that nature. But just missing things is always a big issue. And then I would say probably another top item that I would put out there, if we're summing it down to just a few, is just not appropriately or significantly or commenting enough on why you did what you did. It very well may be the right decision, but if a underwriter at a lender is not going to put 2 and 2 together, then they may not trust your opinion that you did the analysis and came to a reliable conclusion. So, ensuring that you take a moment, and I'm not talking about paragraphs, I'm talking about even a sentence or 2 that can help explain what's going on. And then the last thing I'd probably hit on in this regard, Tim, is engagement letter or assignment conditions that aren't addressed. So as I completed an appraisal and there was a specific ask or request in the engagement letter, and I missed that, and it causes a rework process to happen where the lender or the appraisal management company has to go back and ask for the appraiser to satisfy that condition, which the lender needs to obviously satisfy an investor or their own credit policy.
Let's expand on that for just a second. Talking about the why aspect, you mentioned that appraisers sometimes appear to be a little, how should we say it, a little, well, other than explanatory, let's put it that way, when it comes to the concept of why, especially in the context of not doing what the engagement letter asks them to do. So I think what you're saying is appraisers need to explain not only what it is they do and how it is they do it, but then they need to take greater time. And I'm not talking about hours, I'm talking about maybe minutes. They need to take greater time to explain why it is they did what they did. Do I understand what you're saying correctly?
Yeah. Yes. The notion I think about it as is, would a reader of the report, the intended user, come to the same conclusions I did based on the data and the summary comments and statements that I make in the appraisal?
So let's look at the concept. You mentioned cloning. Let's look at the concept of boilerplate. Now, a lot of appraisers put in boilerplate because it saves time. There's nothing wrong with saving time, but I think what you're saying is there are a lot of the reports that you see have taken a boilerplate and used the boilerplate to replace analysis and reasoning. Is that what you're trying to say?
I think, yeah, well, I might phrase it this way, Tim, in that the appraisers are desires to be efficient, like all of us, right? I mean, none of us want to take a lot of time, right, communicating when we don't have to. I mean, it's why if you're a text messenger, you use the little shortcuts and emoticons to make that process go faster. But in an appraisal process, an appraisal report, often I think that the appraiser will put comments in there that are general in nature and not specific to the analysis at hand, that aren't really helping to the reader to understand why the appraiser made that conclusion based on the data or analysis. And so ensuring that you take a moment to appropriately comment, and it's not to say that the boilerplate or those things are inappropriate. They very well may be appropriate, but that you often need to do a little bit more. We see that there are gaps in the commentary that we are not able to be found in a boilerplate or in a common addendum that someone might include. And and not to mention, Tim, the challenge for an underwriter to often find that information, if it's in a lengthy or buried it somewhere in a text addendum, it may not be found readily by the underwriter.
From a standpoint of boilerplate, the issue is not the use of boilerplate itself. The issue is the boilerplate is probably not assignment or property specific. Thus, you're asking the question, since it isn't those two, since it isn't specific to the assignments, since it isn't specific to the property, why is it there?
Right. Yeah. And then there may be a valid purpose that the appraiser feels is appropriate, but from a intended user of the report, understanding the appraiser's opinions and conclusions, especially on things, adjustments or descriptions of the property, those are critical to have as much information to help me as an underwriter understand what the appraiser concluded and why.
Okay, let's take a look at what it is we do, but let's take a look at it from a different point of view. So my question is, and again, this is crystal ball gazing. I completely understand that. In the future, will there be less, more, or the same demand for appraisals and appraisers? And even more importantly, why?
Sure. And I wish I had a crystal ball that would answer all those questions. Those are important questions for the industry. In my opinion, the need and demand for appraisers will remain. The function that an appraiser provides is important in the lending transaction, in the mortgage transaction, and so forth. Exactly what that looks like in the future is hard to predict. I think we can all naturally see that technology is going to play a prominent and potentially bigger role in how the lending decisions are made. But that doesn't mean that there'll be less work for appraisers. It just might be different. We also, there's a lot of different ways to look at where we're going in this, Tim. And I try to think of analogies because they help me in understanding the world around me. But if I look at what's happening with like cars, right? We see a lot of automation entering the automotive field. I remember when maybe 25, 30 years ago, maybe longer, when I rode in my grandpa's Cadillac, the coolest thing on that thing was that it turned the headlights on and off. That was really cool tech. Well, nowadays that's pretty commonplace, and I would venture to say almost every car has auto turn on headlights, or at least the majority do now. And we can also look at currently, everybody talks about self-driving cars, and that sounds wonderful. We've been working on that for a long time, and we're not quite there. But we do have some really cool things like lane departure that'll help keep you in your lane, helps the driver keep in the lane. We have collision avoidance. We have parking sensors, backup sensors, those kind of things. So technology has improved, I would say, driving, and it will continue to improve. But it's going to take a long time before we don't need drivers. I think appraising is probably at the very beginning of that transition where technology is starting to enter that can help appraisers do a better job and help them have more information than they did before, and do a better job of doing what they do, which is analyzing information and forming opinions of value. So, I think we'll see a lot more of that, Tim, where appraisers are assisted by technology. So, in the CoreLogic world, we have Alamode that has really great tools to help appraisers be more efficient and find data more effectively and so forth. And then we, of course, have tools that we have on Appraisal Port that make it easier for appraisers to do business. And so I could go on and on about how tools are beginning to enter that process, but the appraiser is still part of it. And my hope and what I advocate for is that while the type of appraisals we do may change, that the appraiser remains involved in a core part of that equation, and that we don't move too fast to the idea of self-driving cars where we don't have any insight into what's going on. So yeah, I'm pro appraiser, and I think there's a future for sure in the profession. I do believe it'll be different, but I do believe there is going to continue to be demand and a good future.
So basically what you're saying is, while appraisers are probably going to have to modify what they do and the way they do it, they're still going to serve as the eyes and the ears, as it were, for the client relative to that particular property under appraisal. Is that right?
I see the appraisers, when you say eyes and ears, I'm the way I would describe that, Tim, is that the appraiser is going to still. Recently, I rented a car and it had the lane departure stuff on it, right? As soon as I took my hands off the wheel, it would say, hey, we're going to shut off all the assistance unless you put your hands back on the wheel. I think appraisers are still going to have their hands on the wheel and still be driving and still be in control, but there's different parts of the process may change. So, we hear all kinds of discussion about a hybrid approach where one entity inspects the property and gathers information about the property and shares it with the appraiser. That I can see that process continuing to evolve and becoming more of the norm as the technology and tools become more accepted and more reliable and more understood.
Shawn, thank you. We're pretty much out of time, but before we say goodbye, other than let me wish my best to your family, is there anything else you need to tell us?
Not that I can think of, Tim, unless I forgot something. I mean, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the industry. I mean, I'm a big fan of appraising. There's a lot of work being done to modernize and keep appraising moving forward. It's a very important part of what we do here at CoreLogic. We're very committed to appraisers, to AMCs, to lenders, and to making sure that all of the tools and technologies and processes are available, and that we have lenders can come here and get services and support. So yeah, it's a big deal, and we're firmly committed to this industry.
You said at the beginning that home is Oxford, Mississippi. Given that, may we assume that at the ACTS conference next April, we're going to get to see you?
At this point, I'll go to every conference I can, Tim. I'm excited to see people's faces and interact and be social. And yes.
Yeah, it will be nice to. Well, it's always good to see you. It'll be even better to be able to shake your hand
You
and
bet.
and chat with you at a conference itself. Well, Shawn, again, thank you. It's been great to be with you. It's good. I enjoy the fellowship. I enjoy the friendship. Thank you for answering those questions. Thank you for taking the time. Again, my best to your family. And I know you've got a couple of kids in school, and they're a long way from home, and you miss them. And so my best to them too. So everybody, thank you. We appreciate you being with us today. Thanks for sitting down. I'm Tim Andersen, the appraiser's advocate. We've been with Shawn Telford, who is chief appraiser at CoreLogic. Shawn, if anybody needed to get in touch with you, how could they do that?
They're welcome to shoot me an email. It's S.H.Telford, Telford, at CoreLogic.com.
S.H. Telford at CoreLogic.com. Shawn, thank you. All right, until possibly April, if not otherwise, I look forward to the next time we meet. Thanks, Shawn.
Thank you.